Hey everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. For everyone who's been following along and has gotten really excited to see Vlad and I in the same place, you are seeing Vlad and I in almost completely opposite places. I am back in the mobile studio, heading back to the East Coast, going to go see some folks tomorrow. Vlad is at an airport, and where he originally sat down was allegedly quiet, and then when we popped on, they were having some issues in first class. That's all we know at this point in time. But this is Manufacturing Hub episode 180. If you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. Super excited to go have our conversation today. A little bit of housekeeping. So if you guys have not been following along or were really interested on our concepts of ignition updates and predictions and all of that, episode 179, which is out on LinkedIn and on YouTube, we had Tom Heckman, who is the founder and now CTO of Sepasoft on, and we did a huge deep dive into SEPA IQ, which is the new module that they launched almost 2 weeks ago at this point. We did it in front of a live studio audience, and it was actually a lot of fun because we had a bunch of people asking questions, questions that we all wanted to ask. Hey, David. So that was awesome. Be sure to go ahead and check that out. Also, additionally, I put out a couple of episodes on Monday, each of the last 2 Mondays. So we've got a couple of episodes on my channels out about Siemens Industrial Edge and kind of the overview of what Industrial Edge is and some applications. And then I did a deep dive this past Monday, just a couple of days ago, talking about all about Siemens IPC catalog. We had a lot of fun, especially on the indestructible tablet. We want to ship one to Vlad and see if it can make it through Canadian customs, which is something that we'll hope that Vlad can do later today. Having said that, and without any further ado, hello to everyone in chat. I see we've got a super active chat already. Great to see everyone. But officially, everyone, welcome to episode 180 of Manufacturing Hub. My name is Dave Griffith. This guy, nope, not mirrored. This guy over here is Vlad Romanov. Super excited to go continue on our conversation, go talk about ignition, go talk about all of the thoughts we had. But Vlad, I want to ask you the first question, the question that I feel like I've been asking you on a bunch of these episodes. Your first Ignition Community Conference, your first ICC, what were your thoughts? What were your feedback? Where does it rank among all of the other shows and all of the other events that you've done yourself and we've done together?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we went over this a couple of times even during the Sepasoft stream. But I think since then I've gotten a couple of questions from maybe my friends and colleagues in the industry as well. And I guess I reflected a little bit more. So there's a couple of reasons I would say the Ignition Conference is a bit different than at least what you and I have been going to,
Mhm.
which is Automate, SPS, and I'm assuming Hanover Messe, where, it's a very large trade show versus the ICC is a much smaller venue, which is changing next year. So maybe
Mhm.
it will certainly be, I guess, a more open space. But I think it creates a sense of you get to see a lot of, I want to say, community members, but also, partner either systems integrators or solution providers, people who are creating different solutions around the ignition ecosystem. So at
Mhm.
least again when compared to Automate, I had the opportunity to speak to everyone, right, on the, I want to say, outside of the conferences, and then obviously attend a lot of the talks that I wanted to attend.
Mhm.
um, I would say that, and this was actually a question I was asked, the answer to which I didn't know is that I think there were technical sessions and talks that you could also sign up for that allow you to upskill yourself on specific content. And I think they're switching up the maybe the way that's laid out next year. So it's something definitely to watch out for. But I would say, I guess, I think Automate provides general industry training, right? Versus here you can come in and build your expertise specifically on ignition. I don't know if those curriculums or modules are the same that you can go to inductive automation for, but I would assume maybe there's a bit more information at ICC. So I don't know, maybe you have some more information on that side.
Yeah, I will say when I was at my first ICC, I think it was 6 years ago, they had technical training sessions going on during the 3 days and the couple of days beyond. And then they would go into other specific training. That has shifted. They have workshops going on. I think last week, I know this week, maybe next week, where each of the solutions partners or maybe all partners have the opportunity to go do technical hands-on training. I believe all of it is remote. Not 100% sure if they offer it in person at the various training facilities, but yes. And then I know some people in the past who would come out for ICC and then stay the following week or stay the following weeks to go do their one of their trainings. And we've had conversations. When I first started in the community, I think there was two trainings. Now there are three trainings, and I think we've added two or three additional ones. So there are like five or six trainings, and so they can go a little bit of everywhere. But no, I would agree. It was super fun. I will make the comment because we'll have Esteban Nunez and Francisco Carreon on shortly, where we'll go ahead and play you guys our conversation talking about the international perspective. I don't know if we talked about it on that episode, but I'm pretty sure we had people from six continents over at the conference, the 650-ish or 1,000-ish people total. I'm pretty sure we had people from six continents, which was really, really cool for an event in Folsom, California, and in an event that was fairly small. I'm not sure we have had six continents worth of people at Automate, which is a significantly larger event in the U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, that's where I want to say like my impression lies. I would say that again, although I think we use a lot of hardware products in our industry, I think that the complexity of software continues to increase. So it's important to learn, at least for me, to learn more and more on the software side. And I think the ICC is definitely a good place for that. And I think maybe to make the transition and give some of my impressions of the announcements that were made at ICC this year. So 8.3, I think, brings a lot of updates from the DevOps or the IT side into OT, right? And so that's the message queues, containerization. I think they're doing a lot of work on the backend side. So for me, that is extremely important to be able to tie the data back into ERP levels that are per se not ignition, but also to be able to ingest data, whether that's from plant floor equipment, but also from different databases and different data sources that are fairly common in IT. So I thought that was extremely interesting. I want to say, not entirely surprised by that move. That's what I would expect them to have done because, again, from what I understand, these discussions have been in place for a fairly long time. But what are your thoughts on that side?
Yeah, so I would say that 8.3 as a release was a huge release. You guys will hear me talk about it probably on every single one of the clips that we have coming out over the next couple of weeks of each day that we've had at the conference. But for me, it was huge. I think Carl and Colby went back and forth as to if this should be Ignition 9 versus Ignition 8.3. And as I've said, it certainly feels large enough to have been an Ignition 9 release as opposed to an Ignition 8.3 release. From my perspective, similar to what Vlad was saying, I think it's a huge quality of life upgrade. I think it will certainly make different industries able to grow, especially on the enterprise side. So from my perspective, it's a huge quality of life enterprise upgrade, enterprise opportunity for all of the different groups that you're going to see, all of the Fortune 5,000, 10,000, and kind of across the world that we see kind of more and more logos coming up. In the past, it was much easier to go kind of build a bespoke application for a machine or a line or a facility, but there was a lot of work that not very many groups have the ability to do in order to go through the process of building that to the point of, hey, we can go build this to a dozen or 2 dozen or 5 dozen facilities in the North American or the European region. And I think that this helps lay a lot of the groundwork in order to go do that. So I think that a couple of things. I think we call it Power Historian, or now we're moving to Power Historian. Apparently up to, I think it's a 2 million tags in over the course of a minute, which seems absolutely crazy. I'm super excited when that comes out, Vlad. I actually have a client who that I'm pretty sure we can basically just flip a switch and just go attempt to run 2 million tags on a dev server, and just see what happens. So I think that will be a lot of fun. I think not having to go split some of those historian and those data streams in order to go do that. I think that's a huge positive on just kind of the data side. I think event streams, which is what we've seen other groups come up with, and to Vlad's point, kind of in homage to a lot of what we see the IT groups doing. I think that that will be really interesting. The opportunity to go add CPython 3 and a bunch of other scripting and programming languages will give people a bunch of opportunities when we talk about scripting, and kind of different ways to do that, and kind of a help to move beyond just 2.7, which is what I believe we were stuck at with historical Jython. And so there are a lot of different things that I see as a kind of move towards we are maturing as a group and an organization. And then I would say, kind of, I think my most exciting addition to 8.3, which is probably not very many other people's, because it was buried on the front end, right? It's the offline forms and like offline mode in perspective. And anyone who's followed the work that I've done knows that I've spent a bunch of time working with groups who are not in a factory, or who are not in a factory with really bad connectivity. Vlad has heard this over and over again, mostly when I don't respond to WhatsApp messages for hours and hours on end because I'm in the back corner of a factory and I'm in a meeting room that just doesn't have any cell phone or Wi-Fi connectivity. So I think the offline mode and the offline forums will be really good. In the past, I have worked on and built like custom bespoke iOS apps in order to go solve a lot of these problems. And those are both time consuming and expensive. And I think that that is an interesting opportunity to kind of expand and go build the expansions beyond just kind of legacy, what we know works and what we know works well. So I think we'll find a lot of interesting applications there. I think it also is a bit of a move to continue the global opportunities, with the offline mode, with knowing that lots of places don't have the connectivity of the North American market or the US Southern Canadian market. I think that'll be an interesting opportunity. And then a fun point that I saw talking about communication streams is they're adding WhatsApp in addition to Twilio to kind of their baseline message notifications. And for some of us, that is a very normal use of communication. But for most of the people whose normal use of communication, it's not people who live in the US. So I think that it's very interesting, overall.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting part of, I want to say, Ignition, and not just specifically ICC, but you get to talk to so many people who are doing things in a very, not only different way because of the vertical, but also obviously, clients have different use cases, different challenges, and so it becomes very interesting to learn how people approach different solutions. And to your point, Dave, if you have a big need for these offline solutions, I've personally not seen where maybe that is of huge importance. And of course, plants can have poor network communications, but I'm not sure offline mode, let's say, is the best solution there. But for me, it's more about being able to ingest large streams of data, being able to
Mhm.
push them to, different ERP systems, being able to access different APIs, being able to again interface. I want to say like newer systems, right? Like all the AI, ML, like data analytics platforms that typically use Snowflake or different like Kafka streams, and so
Mhm.
that's kind of the critical update on my side. I want to say, like maybe just double checking my understanding, right? But not all of the updates, and specifically the Jython update, is not coming in as of, I guess, this fall, even in the beta. It's more of a later release next year, right? So, logistically speaking, my understanding is that there's going to be a beta which you can download on Inductive Automation's website as early as the end of this year, but then the full release is coming Q1 2025. But even that first release is not going to have the Jython update. That's just something that they're investigating and sort of discussing, from what I understood.
So I think there are a couple of super important points here that we should clarify. That we should clarify. So one, that they have not rebuilt everything to move off of Jython. They're still on Jython. They will assumably, for if not forever, for the longest foreseeable future, because we're building new things beyond Jython. The scripting language to get to Python, CPython 3 libraries, to get to R and Rust and Go and all of these other scripting libraries is I feel like they call it scripting engine. It's an additional scripting capability. I don't know if that will be out on 8.3.0 or 8.3.1. Um, what I should say is that a lot of the items will be out. They just won't be out to 100%, right? So, like offline forums on Perspective will be out. They might not have every feature and functionality. The Power Historian will be out. It just won't have every feature and functionality. And so, what Inductive does is they have what they call a release train. If you guys follow them on social media, you'll see about every 4 to 6 weeks, they will, at least historically, go post an emblem of a physical train talking about a release train, talking about the releases that they have updated. So this is kind of the vision of everything for 8.3. And they will go spend the next year, the next couple of years building 8.3. So it took 6 years from the launch of 8.0 to get to 8.3. So they're every like 2 years. And I think they said the odds were their major releases, right? So 8.1 is a major release. We've skipped 8.2 and now we're to 8.3. And so I imagine that we're going to go see them, continue to build and update, and we will not have 100% of all features and functionalities on the beta or anything along those lines. They are talking about releasing a public beta. There will not be a private beta. Yes, if you have not been invited to a private beta, there will not be a private beta for you or for any of us until the public beta, and they've announced it. It might be the end of October, but sometime Q4 of this year. And then once they get through the process of officially QCing, I think it's super realistic. Maybe end of Q4, but probably Q1 2025 is when we will see 8.3 officially release. I will say one of the things that I like a lot is the fact that we have so many QC folks internally at Inductive. And so I would imagine that it will be QC to a much higher degree than some of the other releases and maybe some other betas we see from other groups, not necessarily within this industry because we don't see lots of betas within this industry, but I would imagine it will be more of an Apple beta release as opposed to I don't know, two guys coding on MacBooks in their garage, sort of beta release. So I would expect it to be I expect it to be at a much higher level on the sides of betas.
Yeah, and I think, maybe to move the conversation along outside of Ignition specifically, they've also, I guess, announced a couple of general updates that I thought were nice, right? So again, we've talked to some of the people that will be, I guess, in this conversation in a couple of minutes, but Francisco has, I guess, like joined Inductive Automation Australia, right? So through that, they've made it possible to have support. Don't quote me on the exact hours, but if I'm not mistaken, it's 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern. But right now it's 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. if I understand. So I think or maybe it's even 8 a.m. to midnight. But anyways, we'll confirm the hours. Long story short, they are extending the coverage for the software on the technical side. And they've also announced some quality of life features even on the servers and I believe the license managers as well, right? Like you can, if you're doing like multi-site rollouts, then you can manage licenses with your teams a lot better. So I think
Mhm.
there's some quality of life updates that were announced as well as part of ICC that, some
Mhm.
of which were not very specific to 8.3. Um, Other than that, there's some small items as well, right? The learning or the inductive universities getting updates for the new features. I think many of us know that some of the videos have not necessarily been up to date completely, so they've announced they will be revamping some of those materials to make it better. I think they've also recently made some changes to the, maybe it's not been recent, but the certifications at least, core as well as gold. So I've actually got a rundown from some of their people during ICC, and so I'm now more familiar with the current process versus what was in place when I had taken the core certificate. So, anyways, I think a lot of interesting news outside of just the 8.3 launch announced at ICC. Any maybe thoughts before we get into the international conversations on that side, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say from my side, it was super fun to be able to go see. Well, not everyone. It was super fun to be able to go see a lot of people. There were some people who weren't able to make it. Phil Saboa, who's in the comments. And if I had pre-planned this, Phil, I would have mentioned what episode you were on. But Phil was not able to make it over from Australia, which is sad. I was hoping to be able to go see him face to face. And there were just so many people. It was amazing to go see a bunch of old friends, make a bunch of new friends. But there were probably like 8 people that I kept like saying, I will need to come back to you. And I just never caught them, right? Or you catch them enough to say hi and catch in, but you're not able to go have a longer conversation, which is both kind of good and bad, right? It's awesome that the community has grown to this many people, but it's kind of sad that you don't have kind of that same very small intimacy. It was nice to be back in order to see a bunch of friends at very much kind of the bookend here of the Harris Center. It certainly isn't news, certainly not even breaking news on our side, but they are moving to Sacramento to a larger convention center next year. I don't know how many thousands of people it will hold, but certainly won't hear the Department of Funk in the Inductive Automation parking lot on Wednesday night, unless it's a very long shuttle bus ride back and forth. I know Vlad is excited about that shuttle bus ride back and forth. And so it was really nice to be able to go see everyone, have this major announcement at the Harris Center. Yes, it was certainly kind of a bit bittersweet, be able to go see a bunch of it in person. One other thing we didn't talk about that was super cool is the build-a-thon. I know that it's one of those things that I think that if you're like really close into the community, you have seen a bunch of the build-a-thons over and over again. And if you're like half a step out of like not following Inductive on all of the socials, you may not have seen as much of it. I feel like most of the time that I saw it, it was like at the tail end of one of the phases and rounds of people playing into it. So it was super awesome to be able to go see it. It was super awesome to be able to go see the rig that Opto built in order to go do it. I don't think I have any pictures of the rig they built, which is 100% par for the course for Vlad and I at a show like this. And we did have Derek Chambers running across stage at some point, dressed up in a
As a
way that,
wizard.
well, yeah, well, I was going to say, it surprised no one who knows Derek. Yeah, I feel like that is the appropriate. I feel like that is the appropriate reaction. Of it surprised no one who knows Derek, and I feel like almost everyone there knows Derek. He certainly hyped it up a lot, and it absolutely was true. The hype was real. So thank you, Derek, for that. But any other thoughts before we go introduce the conversation that we had with Esteban, and then also the conversation we had with Esteban on Francisco?
Sure. I guess you mentioned the build-a-thon, which I thought was extremely interesting, right? So that was my first time, I guess, seeing it live. I think that the competition is something I would like to see more of in our industry. And again, I don't know if the same format is maybe what would be efficient for as many groups, to have all the time, because it certainly takes a lot of effort to put something like that together. But I think that it very well illustrates also sort of the differences between maybe how things are done on different continents, which I think is very pertinent to this conversation, because we had a team from the US and then we had a team from the UK, right? And you could
Mhm.
very clearly see, and at least my impression was, again, maybe to not spoil the build-a-thon if someone hasn't seen it, and if there's going to be replays. I think there was a clear indication maybe of one being more visually polished and one being a lot more technically polished. At least, in one sentence, that's how I would describe the major differences. But it's certainly, on both sides, I think they've achieved a lot more than I would expect in. I don't know. I guess I would assume they still
This.
slept, but 2 days. Yes, it's 2 days.
I think they had 2 8-hour days. I feel like it
Okay.
wasn't, you guys can go work for 48 straight hours. If you can work for 48 straight hours for these things, Vlad and I will be on the same team together. And I'm just going to let Vlad work for 2 days uninterrupted and just continue to feed him coffee and, I don't know, sugar and sweets until he crashes, and then pick up whatever pieces to give it a little bit of spit polish. But no, I would say
Yep.
so. BIJC from the UK did an awesome job. They had a database designer tool, which was super cool. I feel like there was an audible, oh my goodness, this was super cool, when they went and showed it, where they built the SQL databases and the relations and all of that before they built the tables and everything like that in SQL for their Ignition server. And then DMC, who had a really nice and super polished who had a very nice and super polished look as well. So I think both of them did amazing. I think that both teams should be proud of where they ended in 2 days, right? Like in 16 hours, anyone should be very happy that they got to either of the directions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was extremely impressive to watch. I think, maybe there's some interesting format where you could also ask them questions. We've discussed this a little bit off stream,
Mm-hmm.
similar to what would you call it, kitchen nightmares, or
Mm-hmm.
I guess you just follow the engineers and, throughout that 8 hour period, ask them like, well, why did you make like this decisions or that decision? I think it's very interesting, I guess, once you see the finished product, but I think it's also very interesting maybe to learn about why they decided to focus on, one area or the other. And again, if you're not familiar with the format, you're basically given a physical skid, which, this year and a number of previous years have been built by Opto 22, but ultimately you have a set of requirements, but you also have a lot of leeway as to how you want to implement those requirements, and you can certainly add your own bells and whistles for a lot of those features, right? So I think that leans to a lot of creativity, and it was interesting, I guess, how they decided to approach that specific application. And again, they looked nothing alike, even though the
Mm-hmm.
technical requirements I thought were met on both sides.
Absolutely. I think it's super fun. I think it's super fun. I loved seeing it. I love seeing it in part because I know that it took someone or there was thousands of hours of work, and we just get to see back and enjoy it. I feel like most of the time we are actively involved in the thousands of hours of work it takes to get there. So just being able to go sit there and watch it, what was absolutely super awesome. I look forward to continuing to watch it, and I look forward to I look forward to seeing what happens next year. Having said that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the clips. So we have Esteban Nunez from NV Tech, who is in the comments. I've seen him in the comments. So hey, Esteban, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us. So NV Tech is the distributor for inductive automation down in Costa Rica, and like the, I don't know, like Central and South America, and large parts in there. Esteban has explained it to us a couple of times. I will not begin to list countries and get them wrong. We'll let him go ahead and talk a little bit about himself, and then we have Francisco Carreon, who is my longtime friend, who I actually met at ICC. I don't know if this part made it into the final edit, so I will go ahead and say it for all you guys. Um, but no, so I've known Francisco for a bunch of years. I met him at ICC at the integrator panel, and he has now been on the show in 3 continents, which is beating me. And had I realized this before we brought, like, moments before we brought him on, I'd be like, no, Francisco, I want to be at least tied for the number of continents I've done my own show from. But no, now Francisco is beating us, having done this from 3 continents. So we're going to have to go add some more continents. Without further ado, we're going to go ahead and play the clips. If you guys have questions, thoughts, comments, please feel free to go ahead and drop them in. Vlad and I will be here monitoring the stream as we go through this. I'll pop in to say something in a few minutes, and then we will go ahead and carry on for the rest of it when we bring Francisco in. So without further ado, you guys please sit back, watch, and enjoy. Everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub. Super special. Vlad and I are again together, and we are live in person at the Ignition Community Conference. We've got some fun conversations heading for you all week. This is day one. You guys are almost certainly watching on tape delay because that's the only way this is able to come out for you. But having super fun conversations. And today we really want to hit on the international aspect of the Ignition Community Conference. I was counting yesterday with Francisco, who I think will be joining us shortly. And I think we have 6 continents worth of people here sharing this experience over, I don't know, a few hundred or 1,000 participants all the way around. So I'm really happy that we are here, and we'd like to welcome Esteban Nunez from NV Tech. You guys are the Ignition distributor. I'm going to get it wrong, but the Ignition distributor based out of Costa Rica through Central America and some parts of South America.
That's right.
And I think you have the best weather of anyone who does ignition work.
Yeah, I think we're into the tropical ignition at this point. That's what I like to call it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for the listeners at home, can you tell them a little bit more about what you're doing, the conversations that you're having? I imagine that the market that you're working with is much less mature than the 1,000 people that we're currently seeing floating around who have used ignition for a decade or more.
Yeah, it's of course different because for many people, they're just finding out about ignition. For a lot of them, it's concepts like UDTs, Envision, or in perspective, even of course, that are new to them, that they can play around, or even just the download button and getting the reset every two hours. Just a couple of weeks ago, I met a client virtually, and they showed me their project that they've been working on for 2 months. It was like an OE focused project. I did develop it everything with a trial for 2-hour reset. It was so fun because they are a big manufacturing company, but sometimes, of course, with any company, they have to sell the idea to the executives. So what a better way to do it with an already developed project, right?
Absolutely.
And just to understand, I guess, like the market a little bit better, maybe what kind of industries do you typically work for? Is there maybe a specific focus on just a select few, or do you work with all kinds of various manufacturers?
So I'll say there's not a lot of way to specialize in Central America. You have to go all over the place because there's a lot of big players in specific industries. So we do a lot of everything. We do food and beverage is the main one, of course. Manufacturing, there's a lot of that. There's oil and gas, there's waterways, energy generation. There's a lot of hydro in Costa Rica. There's a lot of new solar installations all over the place. There's a lot of that. There's a lot of investment in solar. And we also have in Costa Rica and Dominican Republic specifically, we have very big clusters of medical device manufacturing, which is a very validation process. There's a lot of how to get in, which is not easy, but we have done it with Ignition thanks to our integrator community.
As a follow-up, and I'm curious, and I'm sure our audience can probably guess which other competitors are being used besides Ignition in those markets. I'm curious what kind of education and maybe what sells them on using Ignition, or maybe working on some of the projects that make sense more in Ignition versus some of the other competitors.
It depends. If it's an integrator, Ignition tends to be a no-brainer if the integrator has the vision to implement something that is more customizable for a customer, or that's more approach like they're looking for them to have this development idea of, okay, this is my development inside Ignition for sure, but it's mine, right? It's my style of application for medical device industry because it's a big cluster in our region, or water, wastewater, or whatever. We are actually working on a specific set of libraries for energy management. So those things are very important. So you can, as a distributor, you can share those resources with the integrators. That's something that perhaps they don't feel like they have that with the competition. They probably have to go to the US headquarters to get stuff like that. And we as a distributor try to not to be just the move boxes guy, try to deliver that. And for a end user perspective, it's, as I said, something like the reset stuff or customization. I think that's the main keyword, customization. The customization that Ignition allows to the customer, they feel more comfortable than when they have to go through a sales guy just to explain the licensing. So it's super complex. Sometimes some customers, I haven't even talked to the guy or I haven't met the guy. And I had a call on Monday and he was like, hey, I went through the pricing webpage. This is what we need. I just need you to confirm it and we'll put the PO next month. So it's a totally different dynamic for them than with the competition.
So I want to learn a little bit more on the talent side, right? So I know that in North America, there's a huge problem in finding qualified engineers to work on the MES layers, especially. A lot of times, yes, you want to convert maybe sometimes people from the OT side and bring them up, or find someone on the software side maybe. And I know that in other regions of the world, schools are in some of them better and some of them worse. So I'm curious, maybe how do you work with your end customers? Or you're finding talent like for yourself and what you're seeing maybe at the end users?
Yeah, I think it's a very mixed. For us, Ignition has been a facilitator to train our own engineers. And it's funny because we started 2 years ago to do a kind of soft skill tests more than hard skills, because with hard skills, somehow we know we can solve it. But with soft skills, it's harder. But there is I think I'll say that at least in Costa Rica, there's a good pool of good engineers. They're scrambled everywhere. And we found people that, for example, used to work at a lot of with SQL and Python. So we picked that and we showed them Ignition. It's like natural for them, right? It's like natural habitat. And we have people that come from the telemetry side of things and they know more about sensors perhaps, or more about the devices, MQTT stuff. So also Ignition is really interesting for them. But in some areas differently in different countries, because we cover different countries, we have to figure out ways to help the customer have that expertise or knowledge, which is not easy. So there are definitely some territories where the pool of engineers or the pool of people, professionals, are not that easy to handle. So of course, there are even some countries that have, just because they have better access to professionals, they have better integrators as well.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. Look, I want to make sure that I ask this question to you, Esteban. So you are here. There are a couple of integrators here. What are you most excited about bringing back knowledge and other things that you learned from the Ignition Community Conference to your territories, to Central and South America?
Oh, we get super excited when we participate at the ICC. We actually plan to do something like not exactly a reaction content, but something like, let's summarize and distill the Ignition Community Conference, because there's a lot that is going to happen this week about the new version, new stuff here and there. There's a lot of buzz about the time series story and API and stuff like that. But I think for us, it's very important that we can distill everything, because it's the mothership here, right? And the Inductive that is showing us the new things. And for our territories is really important because, as I mentioned, we've been a distributor. Well, I didn't mention it, but we did been a distributor since 2020. So we're new in the area or in the Ignition community as a distributor. So we have to digest everything and give everything like more to summarize for them. For us, Ignition community is also, this is such a different experience from what I had before in other automation events. And we try to share that as well, because I think it's important that people see the benefit, the intangible benefit of coming into the community conference as well. So we'll try to give a little bit of that to our community as well, so they feel the warmth, right?
Absolutely. No, I agree. I think that's really exciting. And I'm so happy to see old friends and make new friends here. I feel like a lot of the words that we really talk about are intimacy, right there. It's
Right.
a really good event. It's very exciting. You get lots of the power users, lots of the people most excited about this here at the conference. And then everyone gets to go back and talk to people who might
Hey, Goose.
be not quite as involved in Ignition and inductive automation as we all are here today.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I think there's a lot of knowledgeable people that, for example, I think my first year I met, I don't know if you met John Paraga he's a batch expert. And I met him the first year, and we were talking, and he was just letting me know all things about batch. And it was so fun just to hear him and learn a lot from his experiences. He was explaining to me a lot of what they did with ignition, also for batch stuff. So it's very cool because I didn't know the batch world. I didn't know anything about it. And it's so interesting. And here at the ICC, you get to talk to huge experts on different fields. It doesn't have to be ignition only, right? It's always ignition plus something, some specialization, MQTT or stuff like that, cloud. So I think it's great. That's one of the best things about the ICC, that you get to share with people that are more knowledgeable than you in some areas, and you're maybe more knowledgeable in some other areas. So it's very cool.
Absolutely. Knowledge transfer. I think the
Exactly.
knowledge transfer is one of the best parts of being here.
I do want to ask maybe like a future or forward-looking question, again, like looking at the industry, right? So you've mentioned that solar is picking up traction. I'm curious maybe on your perspective. And again, I'm certainly not looking to take any work away from you, but it is really nice and sunny there.
You do the work in his territory, he gets paid.
Well,
So
there-
that is how a distributor works, Vlad.
good.
Yeah.
Like curious, maybe any industries that are picking up steam that you'd see maybe emerge in the next 3 to 5 years that are interesting for someone who's maybe just starting out in that space, you're looking to specialize certain industry.
I would say solar, of course. I think there's a lot of investment opportunities and ideas that investors have for solar fields in all of the countries, I'll say. Some of the countries that have complicated bureaucracy, more complicated bureaucracy than others, but definitely they want to do it. They want to do it. They will do it anyway. So it's just more faster in some countries. And then for us, for the region, I will say medical device manufacturing, they need a lot of help. They want to navigate, they want to use ignition, for example, they want to use facilitated tools, right? That are more flexible, that are more adaptable to what they need. But they need experts, and they need the knowledge, and they need knowledge transfer and expertise for them to navigate, because they have a lot of painful processes internally, right? There's a lot of validation, there's a lot of taking care of how the data is stored and moved, and the cybersecurity part is super important for them. So it's not easy to enter, but once you're in, they really appreciate what you do. And I'll say utilities everywhere. Yeah, and not only utilities like energy generators like the solar guys, but also, let's say, a manufacturing plant that needs to manage their gas consumption or their electricity bill or a lot of stuff. So, or the water consumption, or okay, I need to manage my water treatment plant, or there's a lot of that. So with ignition, you can put it in the middle and absorb data from everywhere in a plant. Right now, there's a lot of our customers that don't have that. They have a lot of SCADA or BMS systems all over the place that don't really communicate to each other. So they have a lot of pain with transferring data or opening up silos that are really hard because of the way that the application was built some time ago. So I'll say in utilities, there's a lot of opportunities there.
Interesting. I think we see that in the US as well, right? Like we spoke to a few people about wastewater that are consolidating like multiple sites and deploying a data aggregator. So that makes sense.
Absolutely. So wastewater was one of the first major ignition opportunities up all and down the West Coast. You will find a whole lot of ignition in water, wastewater. For me, that is the number one industry that kind of stuck out that they had fast adoption for. And I imagine that they still do. It's just not the sort of work we do. But we had Jason Hamlin on, and Jason does a lot of water, wastewater work. We will have to go find the episode and reference the episode. I was not prepared for that episode reference. In fact, I'm ill prepared for all episode references today.
Hey everyone, before we go ahead and, well, this is a really terrible picture of me. So let me go ahead and try to shift myself back in to picture, which apparently I can't do. So this is what we get. So before we go ahead and jump into the second segment of this, where we've got Francisco, and I will go ahead and wish everyone goodbye. Thank you so much to Esteban. Thank you so much to Francisco for doing this. I know they're both in the comments at the moment, which is super awesome. On completely different calendar days, Francisco, you'll have to give us the Powerball numbers, which is what I'm contractually obligated to ask him every time we go talk about him being from tomorrow. I just want to remind everyone that please feel free to go ahead and ask questions for Esteban, for Francisco in the comments, or just say, hey, we've got a bunch of great people in the comments, some folks who might not normally be watching during the show. So please feel free to go ahead and say hi. I'm going to go ahead and play segment 2. And then until next week, we'll see you guys.
No, fantastic. I want to, Vlad, you're going to have to let me ask the first question.
Sure.
So, Francisco, you've been in Australia for a couple of years, from distributor to now Inductive Automation Australia. What has that transition been, going to a new country, going to a new continent, finding the groups and seeing how excited they are? I think I heard this year there's an 18-person contingent from Australia.
20 plus.
Oh,
Let's put it that way.
I'm sorry. I'm
It's
sorry,
not normal,
for
yeah.
offending all the Australians. No, not at all.
Absolutely.
But what has that experience been like? How has that been for you? What have you learned? How is it different from the other work you've done?
It's really interesting. It's really interesting because in the end, I know that different countries, different cultures, but you come to the point that you understand that the needs, especially in our industry, the needs are the same. The problems are the same. The challenges that each company, each end user, each system integrator deals with on an everyday basis are the same. So it's not difficult to relate to everyone in the community in that space and start trying to solve their problems or helping them solve their problems by, in my case, by using Ignition. But it's like the same type of conversation that we used to have for years, or I used to have for years, with different end users, with different system integrators in different languages, in different countries. But then again, it's been like that for years. I think that at some point we were joking about it when we were saying, like, yeah, with the digital transformation, with the Industry 4, all these really
Fancy words.
fancy, sexy names that the technology has now. But to be honest, like 20 years ago, it was just about, we need data. That's what the customers used.
Need to add sensors so that we can connect the sensors to something. And most of the customers I work with are still at the very base of, we have to add sensors so we can connect them to something so that we can figure out what's going on.
That's exactly right. So digital transformation, then again, it has to be a complete effort on a company. It's not just about connecting things. But in that sense, discovering Australia for me has been quite refreshing, because you see that there's so many cool things happening in that market, coming from system integrators, from end users. It's a very innovative country and culture as well. So in that aspect, I've been nurturing myself with new ideas, with new things that come from that market. And also, as you mentioned before, like trying to give back from the experience that we bring along and create that really cool ecosystem. In some regards, trying to replicate what we have globally as the inductive community, basically, to replicate it as the local Australian inductive community. So that's the biggest challenge that we have faced.
Absolutely. I remember Francisco saying 6 years ago how far behind South America was. And I'm like, Francisco, I'm pretty sure you're like right there with the rest of us. Same problems, same struggles. And so it's been interesting to watch that perspective. I think maybe more your perspective. And I think the rest of the world is probably much closer to maybe our market stance.
Probably yes. No, but then again, it comes down to everyone needs something to be solved.
Absolutely.
And it's really easy to relate because the needs are pretty much the same anywhere in the world, basically.
Absolutely.
Speaking maybe of end users and customers, right? Like, what do you see them drive? What do you see them make as a realization that they need to make those changes, right? And I'll maybe throw in an example on that side from the US, from what I've seen in my conversations. A lot of teams are now hiring these like IT, OT specialists, right? Like people who know both, and they try and hold both sides together in order to get something out of the data. But I'm curious, maybe what do you guys see in terms of initiatives that the end users run in order to facilitate adoption of some of these newer technologies?
That's a really good question, because I think it's a case per case type of analysis. Some customers, they do realize that the need of data, the need of connecting the plant floor to their operations adds value to what they are trying to achieve as a company. And it's a very natural process. And I would say it's a right way to do it in the sense that when they come to that realization, they start implementing things in the right order. To start from there, because and that provides that right path to achieve things with whatever initiative you're having. The second type of digital journey, which is not properly the right one, is those companies that they are getting on board on these technologies because it's part of a trend, or it's out there. If you do not digitally transform, you're in you're not there. So in that space, that's a more difficult case because usually, as you mentioned, these IT, OT type of specialists, they face the biggest problem because probably when IT might be ready, but when they look into OT, they have nothing as a foundational layer for that. And that's the biggest challenge because then you step into these failures in pilot projects and that kind of thing, where you have spent like a lot of money on the IT side of things. And then it doesn't come to the right effect in the company because it doesn't have the data, right? And the third case is those customers that they already have the foundational data, but just because of their culture and the way that the organization has been always driven, they haven't explored digital transformation yet. And they, by any means, by a consultancy happening, or because system integrator brought a different message or something like that, those technologies appear to be, for them, the right channel to break the silo on the data, and they start utilizing. So yeah, it's like a per case scenario.
Absolutely. Esteban, what are your thoughts on that side?
Yeah, sure. So I wanted to add that perhaps there are even end users that don't really even have the vision, like from management, they don't see the necessity even because the plant runs. Customers, I go there. Sometimes they call us because of an automation project or is focused on a line or a machine. And when you start talking to people, especially management, and you figure out they are not really interested in doing data, and there are those guys, I just leave the place. Yeah, it's not enough of an effort. But then there are guys that I think the special part is when the management or some leaders on the company have the vision to implement systems. It doesn't have to have a name or a specific tool, but they have the vision. They wanted to
They want to improve.
Yeah, because they want to improve. It's not just to have it fancy. It's just I want to improve my operations. I wanted to do it right, and they find a way. And sometimes they will have these job positions like OT engineer, and they will have seen those come up lately on some of the countries that we cover, and we didn't saw that 3 years ago, 5 years ago. So it's interesting now that they are taking the bets on those type of people that are like this in between IT and OT that can speak to maintenance guys and speak to IT guys. So it's great. It's really interesting to see they're taking their bets on the digital transformation journey.
I would say that it's definitely the right, I think, approach, but I've also seen, as Francisco, you mentioned those failures where that guy is just pulled like in both directions and starting to negotiate sides that are very challenging in nature. And they just, you know what I mean? They cannot come to an agreement, and those projects just, I guess, don't bring the ROI that was anticipated.
That's exactly right. Because in the end, each one of those projects should be aligning with what, as you mentioned, with a roadmap, basically.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's not about the technology. It's not about the tool. It's about what the company, the organization as a whole wants to achieve, and how they perceive value out of whatever they are trying to do. And that's when it makes sense.
I would say, like, the comment I will make also, and would like to hear your thoughts on that as well. I think the next stage, right, projecting 3-5 years, I think we'll see a lot more like data scientist type of people looking at those systems, because whether I want it or not, like I can see, like I can understand a SCADA and an MES, but I wouldn't have a PhD in data science specializing in how to maybe analyze that and create more of a predictive type of a situation. And I think we have seen that in software, but we haven't seen that yet in manufacturing. And I think maybe the 1% of the 1% is doing that, but it's still a big opportunity, I think. So maybe like curious your perspectives on how well they're understanding the data, and maybe what can they do to understand it even better.
I think they're exactly right. I think depending then again on the case, the industry, the need for it, each vertical is in a different stage in that journey. But I think that the most advanced ones are already collecting, are already modeling, are already like using the data. And what I see in the next following 2 or 3 years is refining that usage, because in the end, like whenever you're stepping into this data world, it's like you start to look at the zeros and ones with a different perspective, right? So it's like you go beyond whatever you were used to collect in order to control and even to operate and even to improve, taking it to a different level where you just want to collect in order to model and in order to understand how the plant actually behaves and be able to analyze that data, not necessarily predicting, I'm not saying that. That's one
I
option.
would like to get there, but yes,
Yeah, that's
I
one option. But I'm saying just to improve, like, the fact that you have live data from your process will enable you to make such dramatic changes, even in such basic initiatives as maintenance. And I'm not talking then again predictive maintenance or anything like that. Just improving what you already have. So you can lower costs, maybe turn it to a more efficient entity. Depending on that, the most advanced guys are probably going to end up like running some type of advanced modeling analytics on using that data, and of course improving in a faster way, I would say, than the ones that are still figuring out how they want to use it. It's absolutely.
Francisco, let me ask, going back to your journey and back to the Asian community, what has your experience been in Australia? And I know since becoming part of Inductive Automation, you guys are expanding far beyond Australia. So what has your experience been of helping the Australian market continue to mature? Because iControls have been there for many years before, and then going into expanding into maybe other parts of Asia and other parts of that world that might not have really had anyone focused on this.
Oh, definitely. As I mentioned before, it's been a journey in every regards, because it's understanding the nuances of how business is conducted in a different country. It's understanding the nuances on how business relationships are managed in a different culture as well. So from that point of view, for me, in my personal journey, it has been really interesting to discover, to learn. I'm still doing it. Yeah, it's been just like 3 years since I went to Australia. So I admit that there's lots for me to learn yet. But in that space, then again, you rely on the previous experience. And regarding the Ignition community, fortunately, it has been from the very beginning conceived as a global entity. You know, even in events like today, like the first day for us that has been here for a while, I think that the first day is not about registration or anything. The old faces and say hi and catch up with the guys, basically, right?
Right.
But that also translates to the rest of the community. So in that space, I think that the same values, the same ways that the community has here in the US currently, globally, as Inductive Automation as well, it was easy to translate into the moment that we became into Inductive Automation Australia, to translate it into the local market. And so we're starting to try to encourage even more that interaction between the different system integrators, that collaboration, and that search for collective innovation, let's call it that way. So yeah, so we're pretty much focused on that.
Perfect. Well, let me come back and ask, I asked Esteban earlier, what are you most excited about the conference and maybe bringing back to Australia and the rest of the Australian contingent who couldn't make it here?
Oh, there are so many things. The first thing that I'm excited about is about catching up with everyone that has made it this year, because this year, I think it's the biggest one that we have had.
Yeah.
And it just keeps growing. So it's really exciting to see, how organically the event becomes bigger and bigger, right? But in that space, there are many sessions that sound really interesting. So what I'm thinking about bringing back is basically bringing back that first, all the information that we're going to get about the new version, which is like the most important topic to be discussed during these days, but also to be able to mingle with those guys that have made a trip here, because as you mentioned at the very beginning, it's the biggest Australian contingent that we have this year. And it's pretty cool to be able to, like, for all of us to be able to sit down on the table, interact away from the everyday activities, because that it's a different set, it's a different mindset even. That's the kind of interaction that we're looking for to bring back, not necessarily because anyone comes to ICC, just because they become part of the Ignition community. So that's the key thing that we need to bring back to Australia. And of course, it has to rely on a foundation. And those companies, those individuals that join us during these days are the ones that are going to bring back that message.
I love that. I want to throw it over to Vlad, because this is Vlad's first ICC. And despite hours of conversation, you weren't really sure, Vlad, what to expect. What are your initial, we've been here most of the first day, reactions to this conference?
I think it was great so far. I talked to a lot of partners, a lot of new partners, a lot of familiar faces, a lot of companies that either support Ignition directly or indirectly, both on the hardware and software side. I like a smaller conference because I have a feeling I'll get to see everything, versus if it's something like Automate, then I have to almost pick and choose 10 locations, and that's the only thing I can do in a week. I'm also looking forward to the after events, which were Obviously, with a very large crowd, impossible. Again, same like looking back at Automate, you only get a very small circle of people, but here I think it's going to be a little bit different. I don't want to ask, I guess, like both of you a very difficult question, right? So I know that Inductive is continuously bringing on, different partners. I'm curious, maybe what do you see as other opportunities or maybe other areas where you would like to see either like a piece of hardware being brought into the ecosystem or maybe a piece of software? Any like interesting ideas that you see in your market? Maybe Esteban.
That's an interesting question. I don't have an idea about that, but I was actually wondering about Eurotech. I think it's the booth. It's about cybersecurity. I find it interesting that it's like a kind of a software and hardware thing. I'm not really sure what they do, but I do want to know they do something in cybersecurity and they're working with Ignition. So I'm interested in knowing that. That's really interesting because connectivity, cybersecurity, all those things. As I mentioned, because of the utility needs that we have back in the region, it sounds really interesting to see if they have connectivity solutions or hardware. That'll be awesome. We're also working a lot with up to 22. Yes. That's very interesting to see how they take advantage of Ignition as well and the hardware and use it together. But I don't know. And right now you got me off my track. I don't.
Well, he said it was a difficult question.
Yeah, it is a difficult one.
Cold question.
But it's a good one.
Yes, because I know there's new vendors coming into the ecosystem, right? So I think there's interesting ideas now. Hey, like what else should be part of? Again, it could be hardware or software. So just curious what you guys
So I will say, Vlad and I had a medium-length conversation yesterday about the Ignition on Board program. Mm-hmm. And that was released a number of years ago, but that is always interesting to me. The ease of use of being able to go buy an Ignition Edge license already on the hardware, knowing that it's going to work with, assumably, in this community, that's going to be the upstream, and it gives you some store and forward and some other backup opportunities. For me, I think that's a really good way to go look at hardware. Similar what Opto does. I think Opto is one of the first kind of major Ignition on Board groups.
Yeah. Francisco, thoughts, ideas?
For me, I let you answer that one first.
Don't hide.
I was thinking my answer now. Now, from my point of view, it's not about the vendor itself. What excites me the most is about the technology that can be adopted. Because in that space, if you think of it, every time that we talk about bringing the gap between IT and OT to nothing, we always think about OT coming up into the IT world. Whereas it's a cross-pollination path. You see what I'm saying? And in that regard, all the technologies that have been in IT as well, good practices that have been there for years, they need to be adopted in the OT world like yesterday, right?
Right.
Because that's exactly the way that directionality that those efforts need to have. So in that space, I think deployment management and change control and all those things being correctly, fully implemented on the OT side of things, not just on the SCADA layer, but ideally on the controller side of things and all those initiatives need to come in the next few years, because that will enable everything to be correctly managed, I would say. And also on the other side of the fence, cross-pollinate technologies that have been used on IT wherever, like LoRaWAN. LoRaWAN is so broadly used on the IT world, and it's so hard to find yet in the OT side of things. And you can find really cost-effective sensors, IP66 rated, and that will solve a lot of the needs that digital transformation requires, that I'm really excited about it. It's been there for years again. Those are technologies that we have talked about for years, but you finally listen and see people actually using those technologies in real life projects.
I think for me, especially with LoRaWAN and some of the less expensive technologies, I think that maybe the biggest opportunities are outside of the United States, where those costs matter a lot more. So I think where the costs matter a lot more, and they're not going to go buy a sensor sold from the US for $1,000 because $1,000 is significantly more in the local currency. So I think that there are some opportunities there. This is actually like the third conversation I have had and or heard today that included LoRaWAN. Yes. And so I think that we're absolutely going to see those as an inexpensive way to go capture data outside of control systems. And we can all look at Vlad cringe, because every time I bring that up, Vlad just wants to run everything through a PLC.
Look, my opinion is I think there's a huge opportunity like on the software side, right? I think we're still like way behind on DevOps practices. I think there's a few companies, there's some companies trying to solve that. I don't think that there's that many within the inductive ecosystem per se. I know like 4AR is working on those tools, and they do like on-prem deployments now, of which I need to learn a little bit more. But my point is, I think there's still a huge opportunity for other players to come in and solve some of those challenges that maybe even they are not currently solving, maybe in the future. Similarly, on the AI ML space, I think there's a lot of conversations in software. There's some conversations in manufacturing. I still don't feel like there's maybe apps that are easy for like even integrators or end users to trial out, right? And I think like my opinion is a lot of them will die, but I still would like to see more trials, right? And I
think as any other technology that has evolved in the market, it will have to be proven, and its value will have to be proven. Yeah. And there's a cycle of it, the early adopters and the value of deception, and then getting into the functional uses of the technology itself. So I think that we went through or probably we are still on the exciting part of the cycle, and we will land those initiatives in the.
I agree. And I think for me, one of the exciting parts about Ignition and the Ignition community is that not everything has to be built on platform, right? For years with Cirrus Link and Arlen and his group, they've made AWS and all of the cloud connectors that you can either buy or you can go make the connections yourself. And there are nearly endless opportunities of where you can go trial and play out with AI and ML once you have your data to the cloud. And so for me, the openness, open architecture, right? I feel like open architecture is really important. And that's with at least everyone I know who is at the conference, especially as a vendor, certainly prescribes to that thought.
Yeah, I'll say that I think that's one of the key elements that Ignition or inductive automation has put on the table for a lot of the industry. Of course, there are the early adopters and the latecomers, but the open architecture idea or the openness, open standard is a very big differentiator software-wise and hardware-wise. There's a lot of installations that are not really open, as I mentioned, like there are silos inside many plants or many clusters of machines or assets, and it's not that easy to work together with those. And it's part of the, as you mentioned, the DevOps idea. I think it's great, but since we have those elements of closeness in many installations or many hardware technologies or software technologies, I think there are challenges here and there. But then I'll say that Inductive has put a foot on the ground for a lot of people, and some other competitors will have to catch up at some point because if not, I think they will still be having a hard time with that.
Agree. So we are almost to the maybe most exciting part of today, in which 3 is officially announced. Vlad, do you have any last thoughts for the listeners before we tell them to like, comment, and subscribe?
I do not.
Okay. In that case, Esteban, Francisco, thank you guys for being here, having this super fun conversation with us. Everyone, thanks for hanging out and listening to us. This will go up at some point soon when you guys are watching it. If you're not already connected, we will have Esteban and Francisco's information. You guys can connect with them on LinkedIn. If you're in Australia or Central or South America, absolutely go ahead and reach out. Otherwise, make sure you're connected to Vlad, myself, following Manufacturing Hub on all of the awesome channels. I've talked to no less than 24 subscribers and at least a couple of new subscribers since we've been here this morning, which is absolutely awesome. But until next time, we'll see everyone soon.